In today's episode, expect to learn how resilience is built in both chosen challenges and also unchosen battles. My guest today is Dr. Jeffrey Reynolds, a public service leader, triathlete, and cancer survivor who has spent the last 3 decades turning struggles into strength. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Jeffrey, you completed your first 5K race in 2010, and since then you've gone on to race over 30 triathlons, including 6 Ironman 70.3s and a full Ironman as well. Yeah. It's fair to say that you caught the triathlon bug, but what was it about that discipline specifically that drew you to it?
Well, I love challenges. And, as you know, my foot racing history was that I went from 5K to 10K to a half marathon to a marathon. And then it wasn't fine to be just mediocre at one sport. I needed to be mediocre at 3 sports. And so I went and took swim lessons and did all the things you need to do in order to do triathlon. The disciplines are so different in nature. They're successive, and so the entire thing is a challenge. But you finish the swim, and quite frankly, if you're like me, you're like, thank God I didn't drown. And then you're onto the bike, and then you're on the bike, and you're like, all right, so I didn't crash. I'm good. Worst that could happen after that is that maybe you trip during the run. But for me, it was that the endurance. It was the using different muscles. It was the emotional and mental endurance that goes along with it, thinking, all right, I'm just at the start. In the case of Ironman, I've got 140 miles left to go, or even 70 miles left to go. And it's those transitions in between. And for me, each discipline is almost like a fresh start, even if you don't feel particularly fresh. It was like, all right, so the swim is done. I can check that off. And now I'm halfway through the ride and that kind of thing. And so I love it. I don't always love the feeling when you're doing it, quite frankly. And anyone who's honest who does these things or runs marathons will say, no, it's torture getting through it. But the feeling you get when you're done in the way of accomplishment, relief, fulfillment, really is unmatched.
Yeah, I definitely understand that point about the transitions as well. So I've done a couple of triathlons myself as well, and that the break between the disciplines, right? It's so different to if you're just doing a marathon and running for hours on end. It's like you say, it's a fresh start, however beaten up your body is. Up until that point, did you have anything in your life that really challenged you in those ways?
Yeah, look, I think we all dissect our childhoods and understand in retrospect that even if we thought it was okay then, it wasn't. There were challenges along the way. For me, there was. And, as a kid growing up, I didn't have an easy childhood. This is not kind of one of those stories about, the kid from downtrodden New York kind of thing. But, I look back now and I had my fair share of stumbles along the way. And I actually had a ninth grade teacher who said to me, oh, look, you could turn out one of 2 ways. I'm just not sure which one it's going to be. It's either going to be really good or really not so good. And so I still think about that today. So, yeah, look, I had some struggles along the way. I also, as you saw from my bio, I've worked in health and human services for 35 some odd years. I've been to dark places with folks, even if I haven't been there myself, right down to, helping to carry bodies of people who died of AIDS out of their homes in the early days because nobody else would. I do a lot in the field of mental health and addiction and that kind of thing. And so I've been with folks to some of those dark places. And it was somewhat surreal when I got my diagnoses to go from being the guy that had all the answers, right? So when your marriage implodes at 2 a.m. or your daughter overdoses at 4 a.m., I'm the guy you call that can kind of guide you through kind of what to do next and how to find a path to recovery or a renewed lease on life. And suddenly I was the one asking for the help. So my 2 cancer diagnoses were probably the biggest challenges that came along, especially the second one. And it was the first time that I looked at things and said, oh, this is a big thing. This could actually be it. When I took up triathlon, I had no idea that triathlon was gearing me up for a race that I never signed up for. But I do think it prepared me, and really those tests of emotional and physical endurance became the testament to what I could accomplish. When I got my first
Mm.
diagnosis, I was, 5 months out from having done Ironman Florida. And I remember sitting there saying, I have cancer. Are you kidding me? I have cancer. I'm too young to have cancer. I'm too healthy to have cancer. And then I thought, I did Ironman and I had cancer. And so I can do this kind of thing. And so I feel that, sometimes the things that we do in life become proof that we can move on and do the next thing, even if it's really hard.
Mm. And you speak about your diagnosis, and obviously you're at the peak of your physical fitness there, having completed an
Yeah.
Ironman, and then suddenly you get sort of slapped with that diagnosis. Was there a point during your treatment that you realized that all of the training that you've done over the last 10, 15 years for your physical events were now benefiting you in the mental side of things?
I think so. What became very clear to me early on, because there's the old story of Jim Fixx, the runner, right? Marathon runner who died of a heart attack. He ran 1 million miles a week, died of a heart attack. Um, so you don't think it can happen to you, but you understand very quickly there's a sharp distinction between health and fitness. They're two very, very different things. You could die the most fittest person on the planet. Um,
Mm.
so those are two different things. So that's a rude awakening and a really, really important distinction that comes along. Certainly the training helped. It helped on two fronts, right? It helped physically. And so when I dealt with my second cancer diagnosis, I signed up as part of a clinical trial, and it was an experimental trial that involved 3 chemo drugs instead of 2. And my oncologist basically said, this is as much chemo as we can give a human being, right? And he said, and we're able to do this because you're in good shape. Your body's not going to cave. We're going to monitor things very closely, but your fitness is money in the bank going into this, because we could do things that we wouldn't be able to do if you were 20 years older and 50 pounds overweight. So that was a big
Mm.
plus. The other thing is, in going through that round of chemo, as we got to like 5, 6, treatments 5 and 6 out of 8. And this was on top of 27 rounds of chemo and radiation. We're in the final stretches, biweekly infusions. And he said, look, your blood counts are dropping out. I'm concerned. The side effects are picking up. Maybe we've reached our limit. I'm like, there is zero chance I am stopping. Like, we're doing this thing. We're going to fix it once and for all. Yes, I'm tired. Yes, I puke occasionally. I know my blood counts are dropping, but we're going to keep this going. If I have to go get chemo from someone else on the street, that's what I'm going to do. But we're going forward. And so it really
Mm.
was, as I went through this, I didn't miss 5 minutes of work. I continued doing what I did. I did workouts regularly, not to the same extent that I'm training like now or was before, but I did workouts every day. And I found that when I did that, I just felt better. And so I went back to that kind of old standby of exercise in terms of it, putting me in the right place and that kind of thing. But,
Mm.
having and if you've raced, then you know this, like mile like 16 to 18 of a marathon is a really ugly, ugly, dark place. And you have to keep saying to yourself, my legs are telling me to stop, but my mind tells me keep going. And, a do not finish is available on the internet forever for everyone to see. And so just keep going. And look, that helped me get through treatment. When treatment was lousy, the side effects were at their peak. I'm like, just keep going. It's going to get better. Just keep going.
Yeah, across various exercise and like races that you go through, your mind can tell you some really try and talk you out of
Yeah.
doing the thing that you're doing, and it's so interesting when you look back on it and you think, I did have that in my legs, like my body could handle it, but my mind was so against it because it's trying to protect
Yeah.
you in that moment, right? And the differentiation between health and fitness as well is really interesting thing you said at the start about how that then helped you to go on to get the treatment, the 3 chemos rather than the
Yeah.
2, because of your base level of fitness. I think people often look at fitness and health about how we look
Right.
and only how we look, not about what's going on inside. And if something does go wrong, it puts you in a much better space. If you look back at the races that you ran and the finish lines that you crossed, was there any one race in particular or one finish line that taught you like a life lesson?
Yeah, I'd say the first 5K I ever did was a 36-minute 5K. And that was the point where I'm like, and I was, 40 something. And I'm like, I did P90X, I did a couple of rounds of Insanity, and I'm turning in a 36-minute, 5K. And so that was a bit of a rude awakening for me, where I said, I probably should do something about this, particularly as I get older. Ironman Florida was a big one. After I had, just so for listener context, so I've had cancer twice. I had two cancers in 2 years. First prostate cancer, in which I had surgery, and then stage 3B colorectal cancer, which was a very, very different kind of ball game and much more serious in nature. And the treatment was more extensive. It stretched out over 8 months. But in between those two things, with the prostate cancer, I had the surgery in July. I ran the New York City Marathon in November, that November. And so a few months out of surgery, I ran the city marathon. And it was,
Wow.
I didn't set the world on fire, but I got through it. Um, and, it was like proof that I was back. I didn't have the time
Mm.
to train the way I wanted to. I didn't have the stamina to train the way I wanted to. But I got through the race. I crossed that finish line. And it's like, all right, so I'm back. Like, I didn't know that a few months later I'd get the second diagnosis. So, and being back to racing now, races, they just hit differently. Finish lines hit differently. I've always been pretty emotional about the finish lines. Now they mean so much more. And, one of the first races I went back to this spring was a sprint try, so relatively short, that kind of thing. And as I got up in the morning, I'm like, I get to do this. It wasn't like, oh, the water's cold, it looks a little rough out there, or this is going to suck. It really was, I get to do this. And, that point was reinforced for me. There was a physician who had come out of, finished the bike, racked his bike, went out on the run, and promptly had a massive heart attack on site, so that I ran by and literally saw them pumping on his chest, trying to bring him back. And it was clear that that wasn't going to happen. And
Mm.
so when I got up that morning, I said, not everybody gets to do this. I get to do this after taking a break. And as I went home, I crossed the finish line. I went home. I'm like, not everybody's going home today, And so
Mm.
you learn those little moments of gratitude along the way. And so I think all races hit a little bit differently now. I'm gearing up for a 70.3 try within the next couple of weeks at Jones Beach here on
Awesome.
Long Island. I'm doing the New York City Marathon again in November. Um, as you train, you understand those races become like placeholders and things to work for, and so you can't skip a workout if you want to have the day that you've planned. But
Yeah.
even now, it's kind of like I put those races in the book in order to get that little boost of gratitude to say, not everybody gets to do this.
Mm. So that reframing of your mindset when you go into races now and you say to yourself that not everybody gets to do this, it's something that we hear so often from people who have sort of been forced to battle cancer or whatever it might be. They might have been going through something else, but they often say it after that. Do you think there's a way for people to learn that lesson beforehand, or is it almost something that people have to go through a sort of challenge, whatever that challenge may be, in order to learn it?
I think I'm a pretty centered person, pretty enlightened based on kind of my work and the things I see. Um, it still had to happen to me until I fully appreciated it. So, I think you can understand it and get it and appreciate it and be grateful up until a point. But once you're in that place, I can remember sitting in the infusion rooms, and when you get chemo infusions, generally you sit in an infusion room all day. It's a whole room full of like reclining chairs, and there's people in various stages of health. Most of them appeared to be sicker than I was, but it's freezing in there. You're under a blanket, that kind of thing. I can remember looking out the window and seeing people running on the sidewalk, and being really, really jealous and saying, I'm here. I've got, this poison pumping into my chest. I've got, a blanket on because it's freezing. I can't eat anything. And they're out there running, having a good time. And so, I think it's only when you have some of those moments that you get that gratitude. And I would extend that to life too, right? So most of us, I never thought like in my 40s and into my 50s, I'd be contemplating kind of the end, right? I'm like, I'm going to live for a long time. You don't really think about it that much. You wrestle with some of those big picture questions about, what lies beyond, what do I want my legacy to be, that kind of thing. But you don't fully like vet those out because it's not real. You see on a medical chart, and these days we could see everything on our medical charts. And, my doctor put a note that he had discussed with me the possibility of my own mortality, of the treatment not working and me dying of this. And seeing that in black and white was like, oh, yeah, people die from this thing. This is a whole different ballgame.
Mm,
Even the first time around, I'm like, well, most people don't die from prostate cancer. Many men die with it, right? Because the odds are most of us will get it and something else will take us out before that does. But the second time, it was really that wake up call. And so, I think only when you get that glimpse of an illness or have some big thing happen in your life where you narrowly escape, a catastrophic ending, do you fully appreciate and become aware of it. I also think I find myself sometimes like needing those reminders. That's why I do the races.
yeah.
I actively look for those reminders now, but you need those reminders. And that might just be kind of the way our minds work in a coping mechanism, right? So if we all walked around worried about the next thing that was going to take us out, we'd barely be able to function, I think. And so some of that, walking around kind of in the daze and just taking things for granted and not worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow is just part of life and part of survival. But I think every now and again, you get those little glimpses, either vicariously through what someone else is going through or your own experiences, to say, I'm pretty darn lucky.
Mm. Yeah, it's an important thing to sort of think about for people who maybe haven't gone through that, and to, as best they can, try and put themselves into that mindset and allow themselves to appreciate what they do have and what they are able to do. And that when they don't want to get out of bed to go for a run in the rain, well, actually, there's a lot of people that would be looking out that window
I
wishing
would
they
have killed
could.
for it at some points in time.
Yeah, exactly. And so maybe also sort of staying on people who maybe don't fully understand things in terms of cancer, is there anything that people who maybe haven't been through a cancer diagnosis misunderstand about the illness and the things surrounding it?
Yeah, look, what I would say is, and this is the public service announcement portion of the show. In neither case did I have any symptoms whatsoever. So when I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, I was diagnosed during a routine physical exam. I thought
Okay.
everything was fine. I'm great. I get a checkup. It's the right thing to do, whatever. I went and got the checkup, and they're like, all right, so there's a thing with your PSA. And normal, a man's normal PSA is 4. It's a test they do. Mine was 4.32, and honestly, my doctor's like, well, it's just above the abnormal line, but it's twice what it was a year ago. We should check this thing out. And then you get swung into this whole world of invasive tests and that kind of thing. But I had no symptoms whatsoever. Same thing with the colorectal cancer. By the time I went through prostate cancer, I was like an evangelist for early detection and routine screening. And so I went to get a colonoscopy, went to sleep thinking, this is pro forma, everything's good, that kind of thing. And when I woke up, my doctor said, look, there's a significant mass. You need to find a surgeon. And so I had no symptoms whatsoever in either case. And so get checked. My the prostate cancer probably wouldn't have been the end of the world, but prostate cancer spreads, and once it spreads into other organs, or even within the prostate, you have either life-changing consequences or it begins to affect other organs. With the colorectal cancer, they had determined that I had a checkup 3 years beforehand, so this was fast growing. And
Mm,
quite frankly, another 6 months, this would have been stage 4 and potentially a very, very, very different outcome. And so, first and foremost, get checked. I struggled a lot. Most of my friendship, all of my friendships really drew closer and that kind of thing. But some of the terminology we use around cancer is actually fairly interesting. And so when you are during treatment, we refer to ourselves and people refer to us as warriors. And then, you've got the proclamation that you're in remission is what they used to call it. Now they say no evidence of disease, which just feels a little bit more cautious to me. Um,
mm.
you become a survivor. And I'm like, so the warrior thing always felt weird. And look, I love that mindset, right? I'm gonna, you know, get in there and beat cancer and that kind of thing. And, you know, so I loved the imagery, but there was another part of it that, you know, I sat there in an infusion room one day and I'm like, well, like I'm not that brave. I didn't have a choice unless you're going to give up treatment and just say, all right, let cancer do what it wants to do. So like what's the brave part? And as far as the
Mm.
work, I sat in a chair. The chemo did all the work, right? I had to bear the brunt of the side effects. So I wrestle with the terminology sometimes. I've adopted it, but I wrestle with it. One of the things that I found very often is that my friends would say to me, I don't really know what to say. And I would say, that's
Yeah.
okay. That's exactly what I want you to say. I don't know what to say either. And so I did have friends, and I can be somewhat confrontational when I want to be. And I would have friends that would say, oh, this is going to be fine. You're going to be okay. And I'd say, that's really reassuring, but how do you know? Like, my oncologist won't promise me that. I'm not sure of
Mm.
that. How are you sure of that? Or is that what you're saying to me in order to help yourself feel better? I'm not sure I'm going to be okay. I hope I'm going to be okay. I'm going to do everything I need to do in order to increase the chances. And so one of the things I always and look, the reality is we'll all know somebody with cancer if we don't. And so I think it's fine to say to somebody, I'm sorry this is happening to you, and I actually don't know what else to say. And that's fine.
Mm.
We'll all fill in the silence. It's all going to be okay. And sometimes, you know, I think men tend to want to fix these problems more than women do. And so, and look, my entire life I've helped people fix their problems. And so there's not really good answers when cancer happens in a lot of cases. The important thing is that you show up. The other thing I say to people is that if someone you love is diagnosed, don't say, what can I do to help? Because we'll never give you a straight answer. We'll say, I'm good. Don't worry about it. Just do it,
Yeah.
right? Just do it. If you want to help, just do it. The third thing I would mention is, you know, and this happened to me and I wrote about it in the book. You go through a very, very long treatment stint. It's like you're running to the end of that race. You get to the finish line, and at the finish line, when you finish cancer treatment, is a big brass bell. It's either brass or chrome. It's on every cancer unit in the universe. And you ring that bell at the end of treatment. And I felt weird about ringing it. I rang it twice. Once when I finished my first round of treatment, and again when I rang my second round of treatment. And I thought a lot about it before I rang it the second time because it's in the middle of this infusion room where half the people in that infusion room aren't going to survive, and they didn't. And I'm like, so here I am, like celebrating the end of treatment. There are people who literally have days to go, and they're not going to get the opportunity to ring that bell. There's going to be church bells ringing for them, not the one on the wall. And so
Mm.
I had like that survivor's guilt about ringing the bell. But the part that they don't tell you, or at least I didn't hear it, was that although you ring that bell, and you think it's done, that's when the extreme effects of chemo kick in. It's a cumulative kind of thing. So the same way, you know, if you do a long race and you feel great afterwards, and the next day you have delayed onset muscle soreness, we call it DOMS,
Yeah.
this is the same kind of thing. So you finish treatment, you're like, I rang the bell, I'm done, it's all great. It's like a big giant Hallmark card. Your friends clap, all that kind of stuff. Then the side effects come both barrel, and that's actually when you're the sickest. So everyone is like, oh, he's done. They go home, they go about their business, they forget about it. Like, you're good now, right? And it's actually the hardest part. And I would say it takes
Mm.
like 3 months after that before you even start to feel better. But everybody's attitude is, well, you beat this thing. You finished treatment, you're good. Everything is awesome. And on the outside, you act that way. So if you know someone that's going through treatment, understand that sometimes the hardest part is when all of that is done. I still have side effects. I'm 18 months out, and I still have tingling in my hands and feet related to neuropathy. It's just nerve damage. You spend 8 months pouring
Yeah.
poison into your body, so you're going to have some side effects, you know. And so when the doctors kind of proclaim and say there's no evidence of disease, I'm like, yeah, but there's evidence of the treatment. And, you
Mm.
know, and in another way, there is still evidence of the disease because cancer changes you forever. It changes your outlook. There are people who will say, well, cancer was such a gift. It taught me this and taught me that. Cancer is not a gift. Let me just say that. But it can give you things that you didn't have before. And so, look, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. It's tough to manage psychologically, emotionally, and physically. But if you do it in the right way and you experience all that comes with it, including the deepening of friendships, the deepening of the relationship with yourself, of however you define a higher power, there are some things that you can take from it that enhance your life, assuming you're able to ring that bell.
Yeah. The stuff you spoke about how people would speak to you when you were going through it really stands out to me. I've spoken to a lot of people on this show about mental health and the conversations around that. And obviously from your work outside of that, you will know as well. Now, when someone's going through something, like you said, everyone's natural thing is to try and fix it and to try and reassure them that it's going to be okay without actually knowing the facts. And yeah, like you said, that sitting in it with the person, I think gives so much more strength just for the person to sit with it and say, look, I'm sorry this has happened to you. It must be really tough. And yeah, about what you said about the offering to do stuff. If there's anything you need, when you're in that hole, there's the last thing you can think about is anything that you need.
Right.
So if just say, I'm going to come around and cook you dinner tonight or
Yeah.
something like that, and just give them something. And like you say, sort of do it. And I think that's just a important thing for people listening to know. And that's mental health and physical health across the board, really.
Yeah, don't fix it, but come up with things you could do. One of the things that changed pretty dramatically for me was my relationship with other guys. Right. So
Mm.
I had two of the most, embarrassing cancers you could get as a guy, right? And I'll tell you, so women, when they had breast cancer, used to feel exactly the same way, right? It was kind of taboo. It involves reproductive organs, that kind of thing. And I think, breast cancer became pretty mainstream and that kind of thing. But when it comes to prostate cancer in particular, men don't really talk about that. Right. And so
Mm.
that's one of the reasons it goes undetected, because men will experience symptoms, be afraid to talk to their doctor about them, downplay them, that kind of thing. My relationships with my male friends actually got better. In fact, I wrote it in the book about three friends in particular who kept saying, I love you, when we would get together for lunch. And the first couple of times, I didn't know what to say, so I'd say anything. Yeah, and it was weird. And it wasn't like guys will do that like outside the bar on a Friday night. You're kind of saying goodbye and slap each other on the shoulder. You all had a few drinks, love you, man. It was not like that. And I remember thinking, getting in my car like after each time it happened, and thinking to myself, like, maybe they think I'm gonna die. Like, do I look that sick? They said I looked pretty good, but it's almost like they're saying goodbye to me. Why would they make these big proclamations? And it really caught me off guard. And so, with those three friends in particular, I think it brought us closer. We were able to have some real conversations about, legacy and what we want our kids to understand and know and that kind of thing, and what it might be like to leave people behind. And so there are people in the cancer space who talk about, my friends avoided me and that kind of thing. I didn't experience that. I know that people do, but I didn't experience that. If anything, my friendships grew a little bit closer and tighter. I also found that once you're diagnosed and you're pretty public about it, and I was public about it from day one, I wanted people to know for a whole bunch of reasons. Then people who are newly diagnosed come to you and say, all right, this just happened to me. Like, where do I go? What do I do? Should I be freaked out? That kind of thing. And I always say to people, look, I have a PhD, but I'm not a medical doctor. I've had cancer, but that doesn't make me an oncologist. And so I can share my experiences with you. But you really need to get yourself to good medical care for that aspect of things. And so there is this,
Mm.
pretty close informal network of people who are walking the same road and have been on the journey.
Mm. Talk to me about the I love you part. So men speaking to other men, there's still this sort of stigma maybe around sort of opening up fully to each
Yeah.
other sometimes. And I think it's getting better, but it still requires a lot of work. Is that something that we should be doing a lot more often, you think? Should we be telling these people close to us how we're really feeling and how we really feel about them as well?
Yeah, look, I think, whether or not you're facing a significant diagnosis, none of us knows what the future brings, right? I don't think we've ever regretted. Look, I think there's a lot of times we lose people from our lives and we're like, oh, I wish I had one more chance just to say that. Right. So if we think about our parents or family members or someone else we've lost, what we wouldn't give to have one more dinner with that person or just one more talk on a
Mm.
park bench with that person. And, I've survived cancer. I can get run over by an ice cream truck this afternoon. Right. And so anything could happen to any of us at any time. And so, you learn with cancer. I think with cancer, I, I I don't want to say I never cared that much about kind of what people thought, but I generally speak my mind. I'm not shy about saying things. You become even less shy about saying things because you're like, you know what, this is my opportunity to say it. I'm going to say it. Whether it's, calling somebody out on their behavior or telling them you love them, people ought to know exactly where you stand, and when you stand. So. Look, this is not one of those kind of lectures and that, we never know how much time we have, but it's true. We never know how much time we have. It shouldn't take an illness for you to form those friendships. But there were people who came out of the woodwork and, like support from really unexpected places. And I'm like, I didn't know this
Mm.
person like cared this much about me or followed my life or that kind of thing. And sometimes, I'd get notes from people on social media and I'd be like, that's really nice. There's a lot of nice
Mm.
people around, and if we give them the opportunity to be a little bit nicer and express that and open up our hearts and our minds, then those connections just grow stronger.
Mm. Yeah, if we can find a way to make people be that nice all of the
Right.
time, as opposed to when people are going through it only, the world would be a much better place, right? So tell me about your work that you do. You've spent most of your life sort of working in this health aspect. You've built communities for people going through things, AIDS, mental health. How did community show up for you when you needed it? Did it reverse?
I think so. So most of my work in the past 10, 15 years has been focused on the opioid crisis and people who struggle with addiction. And here in our community, it started with prescription pills and then moved to heroin. And there's a very, very strong network of parents who have lost children in our community that I've become very, very friendly with, as well as a number of young people in recovery, um,
Mm.
who I've remained connected with. And so that community did show up in a very big way. I think they wanted to help more than I let them. I
Right.
remember, and this is kind of the way, this was another rude awakening in terms of the way help works. Um, I felt like for years, people told me their deepest, darkest secrets. I held on to those secrets, kind of got them, helped them get to the right place, kind of walking beside them, not in front of them, not, behind them, but alongside them. And then when this happened, I'm like, I got this. I don't no, I don't need anything. It's I'm good. One of my friends, said to me, if you ever want me to drive you to chemo, I will, but I know you'll never say yes to that. And it really struck me. And I didn't. But I will say that the rude awakening for me is he needed to do that as much as I needed it, maybe even more so. And it got me
Mm.
thinking a lot about kind of my role as the helper and that kind of thing, and that unless you unless you let people reciprocate, um, then there's going to be a barrier in that relationship. And when it comes to some of the people kind of in my professional circle, there's professional boundaries and things like that. But I will say, everybody, including the board of directors for the organization I run, was like, whatever time you need off, that kind of thing. I'm not the kind to take time off and say, I feel a little pukey today. Like we throw up
Yeah.
during marathons, we wipe our face off and we keep going. I did the same thing here. And so I don't think in retrospect, I don't think I let people in as much as I should have, not for me, but for them. But the community did come around. And look, there are a lot of people who were desperately worried, and then people who were not in as good shape as I was, who are like, "Holy, if this could happen to you, really?" And so it spurred something in them. One of the things I said to all the folks who kind of rallied around me is, "Look, the best thing you could do for me and for you is go get checked. Like, just go get checked and find out what's going on. I'll be here, we'll talk. There's nothing that I need right now unless you're an oncologist. Um, but knowing that I had an entire community behind me just went a long way. I never
Mm.
felt, somebody said to me, look, you spend 30, 35 years helping other people. Is this the time when you get paid back for all that? I'm like, I don't really need a payback for all of that. I got it. And I
Yeah.
got it by watching, people, reclaim their lives from addiction or reclaim their lives from depression or, just find a new pathway. That's where kind of I got my bump from, and that's where the payoff was. But it was nice to be part of a larger health and human services community. When I got my
Mm.
first diagnosis, I had, five doctors that I could call who I knew very well, and they tell me the straight story. When I got the second diagnosis, I had one doctor friend who said, this is a big deal. Like, you really need to understand the gravity of this. I'm saying this to you as a physician and as your friend. This is no small deal. Um,
Mm.
and so that was helpful. I wound up going to a healthcare system where I did not know the CEO, probably the only health system on Long Island where I didn't personally know the CEO and have that person's cell phone number. The nice thing about that experience is that I didn't need to know anyone. The red carpet was rolled out. I was treated, with impeccable care and love. I write in the book about the nurses and talk about a thankless job. Look, I've been in healthcare and human services for a long time. I got to see, like, straight up what these nurses deal with. And when you're a chemo nurse, there's the risk of chemo exposure. There's patients who are not very nice, because they're scared, right? They're frightened. The
Yeah.
families are
Yeah.
terrified. And so it really is a thankless job. I'm sure they get, some of the same things that I've got from health and human services over the course of a few decades, but it's a very, very tough job.
Mm. If you could go back and speak to yourself in that, going through that time where you can now acknowledge that maybe you didn't take on the assistance that was being offered to you, would you tell yourself to open up to some of that more? Would you change how you reacted to it?
Yeah, I think I would. And again, not from me, because I don't feel like I needed it. Um, so like the excuse me, the Ironman moniker comes with some pluses and minuses, right? The plus is like I do Ironman triathlons. I've run 15 marathons. I can deal with cancer. Are you kidding me? The flip side of that is tough guy. You could use some help, right?
Mm.
And opening yourself up to that. So yeah, I think I would do that again. Probably not for me, but for the other person to feel a little bit more connected. Um,
Yeah.
and not, I don't want to use the term useful, but like dialed into my disease process, right? When you
Yeah.
do something nice for somebody or you connect in a new way, you get that dopamine rush, you get the oxytocin rush, you get that love hormone kind of thing going, even if it's just, in a friendly kind of way. Um, and I look back now and I'm like, I deprived them of that. In fact, I write in the book about playing the cancer card. And so over the course of all of my treatment, I didn't miss 5 minutes worth of work. In fact, I enrolled in a clinical trial in part because I wanted to help other people, but also because it leveled the playing field, right? They now need me as much as I need them, right? I'm a subject, I have data, and I'm like, all right, that levels things out. So they said to me, all right, so your radiation appointments are going to be at 2 o'clock every day. And I'm like, no, they're not. They're going to be at 7:30 a.m. because I need to be at work by 8. And they were like, okay. And there I was every morning, 7:30 a.m., 27 days running. And I was in my office at 8 o'clock work. Like most of the people here, we have 360 employees here. Most people, aside from my C team, had no idea what was going on until I disclosed it at the staff meeting. And I didn't disclose it until I was all done and finished. Um,
Mm.
and so, I look back now and there's like stuff in the evening that I don't want to go to. And I'm like, I went to everything when I had cancer. Boy, I almost wish I could trot that cancer card out now and say, I don't want to go. I have cancer. And so,
Yeah.
I didn't call in sick, that kind of thing. And I almost wish like I took a little bit more time in that process
Yeah.
because it was from the rat race of treatment to, just the steady rat race that occurs every day. So in retrospect, I do wish I took a little bit more time. I do wish maybe some time off and that kind of thing. But
Mm.
at the time, you know, throwing yourself into work, and we all do that in various ways, kind of gave me the illusion that, no, look, see, you're fine. You're still going to work every day. I don't know if I was trying to convince the people around me or myself or maybe both, but
Yeah, both. Yeah.
that immersing yourself in work and saying, I can still do this. I can still get up at 5 and ride the Peloton and then go to radiation and then come into the office and then go home and do a few more hours worth of work until 10 o'clock at night. It was probably me trying to kind of prove to myself, no, look, you're really okay. You're going to be good. I think there are other
Mm,
ways to get that reassurance, but also the peace with the fact that you may not be good.
mm,
As much as I had to reckon with that possibility, I'm not sure I fully reckoned with it because, there's a point in time where the doctors say, okay, so we're going to stop. And then you have an off ramp to things. I never got on that off ramp because I had pretty good results out of the gate early on in treatment. And so I never had to fully engage that part of my mind. Other people do.
yeah. Yeah. Tell me a bit about your new book then. So you've released a book sort of talking about what we've spoken
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
today. Um, what is it that you hope to achieve from sharing your story with people to a wider audience?
Yeah, so look, it's got some of the tips in terms of managing the disease that we talked about in this conversation. It's got some tips for family members. It kind of chronicles my journey through both diagnoses and how, my fitness and endurance sports training helped me get through those things. So part of it is encouraging people to get more active. There's obviously a lot in there about the importance of early detection and getting checked. I am a white middle class guy living in suburbia, so I had access to the best care in the world just outside of New York City. Everybody's not that fortunate, and so I write about some of those healthcare disparities, both in screening, detection, access to treatment, wraparound service support.
Mm,
There were folks who I encountered in the infusion rooms who took 3 buses to get to their appointments. I drove my air conditioned and heated car to my office, in 30 minutes and was at work and, having breakfast delivered via DoorDash. And so not everybody has it the same. And so cancer
mm,
still has incredible healthcare disparities in this country and in others. I talked a lot about the research agenda, which is currently under threat here in the States because of budget cuts and that kind of thing, and how important it is to
right.
continue to advance those research programs. And then just talked a little bit about how my relationships changed, how my relationship with religion and a higher power changed, and really just some. They're not words of wisdom, but just some advice for people who might be facing any serious illness or any serious bump in the road. Again, you don't have to have cancer in order to benefit from some of the tips that I offer. You don't even have to have a medical condition. Some of them are just good reminders for life. And my hope is that maybe somebody picks up this book and doesn't need to get cancer in order to learn some of the lessons, that maybe they read it and something in the book inspires them and they say, you know what, I never thought about this in that
Yeah.
way, and maybe I should.
Yeah, I think there's definitely power in sharing these stories. And again, from this episode, hopefully people will sort of hear those things that you've explained about how it changed your perspective and be able to implement them in their own life. If you could write one line in a survival guide for someone who maybe is recently being diagnosed, what would you tell them in that line?
I think the one line would be keep going. Right? It's what we tell ourselves during races, even though everything in us is telling us to stop. Everything in you might be telling you to stop. Keep going regardless of the outcome.
Mm,
To go beyond, the one line, I would say open your mind, open your heart. Your relationship with yourself is as important as it is with other people. And so let other people in a whole new way. Um, Stop and experience life. One of the things that happened, I'm used to kind of running as fast as I can, which honestly isn't all that fast. But I'm used to running as fast as I can. And after I had the prostate cancer surgery, I was forced to walk. My doctor said, if you run, you won't be able to do the city marathon. I'm going to have to do the surgery over. And so I walked, and as I walked, I saw things that I never saw before. I ran in the same places that I typically ran, and I was able to see things that I hadn't seen before, you know, a hawk circling in the sky, a bee on a flower kind of thing. And I took pictures of a lot of those things. And so what I'd say to people, we live in a very hurried time that's focused on social media and very quick, you know, TikTok clips and stuff. Slow down for a moment, take notice of what's going on. Just, you know, we all have a finite amount of time, and I almost envision it as if there's a countdown clock at the wall above each of our beds and above each of our desks, and it's counting down on a regular basis, and nobody kind of knows when the buzzer goes off. And so act as if the buzzer is going to go off soon. Say the things you need to say, love the people you need to love, and most importantly, spend time with yourself.
Yeah, it's great advice. And I think the aspect of slowing down a life where you can as well, like we are, like you say, we're in this fast paced rat race, always on the move, always going to a next appointment or next meeting, whatever it is. Something I've done recently is trying to walk to places more, if within reason. For those reasons, like you said, you do spot these things that you never saw before. Don't walk around on your phone when you are walking. Just keep the phone in the pocket. We see so many people just zombified by their phones at the minute, and it's so sad. But yeah, like you say, I think that's great advice. Something I like to do at the end of an episode is I ask my guests to leave a question for the listener. So this question could be something that they can take away from this episode and start a conversation with a friend, a family member, or even a stranger. If you could leave them with a question to go away with, what would that be?
I love that. I think it would probably be, what did you do today that scared you? And if the answer is absolutely nothing, you're living life in a way that's less than optimally.
Yeah.
Do something that scares you. When I registered for Ironman Florida, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I could do this. But that's exactly why I should sign up for that. When I got both cancer diagnoses, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. We have the ability to choose to do things that test our limits, that push us a little bit more, that scare us a little bit more. Get out of that comfort zone. If it doesn't challenge you, it's not going to change you.
Wonderful. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. If people want to find you online and keep up to date with what you're doing, find your book, where can they do that?
Sure. Book is available at Amazon. I got to get in the frame here. Amazon, other online retailers. I have a website for the book. It's called everymilematters.com. Feel free to check it out. Look me up on socials. Sam, thank you so much for having me on today. I really, really enjoyed our conversation. I love that you facilitate conversations about these really game-changing and life-changing issues. It's really valuable. So thank you for everything you do.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on. And yeah, hopefully you, the listener, have taken a lot away from this episode. If you have and you think there's someone that you know who would also find value from it, please do share it with them. It helps other people hear these important conversations. If you haven't already, please do follow and rate the show. It helps the show get shown out to new people. And if you haven't already, you can follow on Instagram to keep up to date at Lonely Chapter Podcast. And lastly, from me, thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.